Turn now to Massachusetts, a courtroom there where we saw a very different side of Lindsay Clancy, the mother on trial for killing her children during what her lawyers say was a struggle with postpartum psychosis. Just yesterday, Clancy broke down in tears hearing details about their deaths. Today, far more composed as the jury heard about her internet searches and private text messages. CBS's Chanel Call with the update.
Can you treat a sociopath?
I'm sad and depressed because I am not able to parent my third child like my first. It's about starting a new med or not. I want to feel happy, but it would be nice to feel authentically happy and not fake.
January 20th, 2023, 9:14 p.m. In a quiet colonial home on the Massachusetts coast, a mother picks up her phone. She's a labor and delivery nurse. She spent her career helping other women bring life into the world. Tonight, she types 4 words into Google. Can you treat a sociopath? She hits search, reads the results, puts the phone down. 4 days later, her 3 children, Cora 5, Dawson 3, Callan 8 months old, will be dead in the house behind her. And when police pull the search history from that Microsoft Surface Pro, that single question, asked in the quiet of her own home 4 days before the unthinkable, will become one of the most disputed pieces of evidence in the case. Was it a mother recognizing something breaking inside her own mind? Or was it something else entirely? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. I'm your host, and this is Mysterious Crime Chronicles, the true story behind the headlines. Duxbury, Massachusetts looks like the town on the cover of a real estate brochure. Colonial homes, a harbor, a high school that sends kids to Ivy League schools, a crime rate so low that most years, the police blotter is just parking complaints and a raccoon in someone's trash. At 47 Summer Street, that image seemed to hold true. A young family had built what friends and neighbors describe as a picture-perfect life. Patrick Clancy worked in software sales. Lindsay Clancy had spent years as a labor and delivery nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital, one of the most respected hospitals in the country. She had held newborns for a living. She had comforted new mothers through the hardest days of their lives. By January 2023, Lindsay and Patrick had 3 children. Cora, 5 years old, was starting kindergarten. Dawson, 3, was the kind of toddler who insisted on dressing himself, obsessed with trucks and firefighters. And Callan, their youngest, was only 8 months old, still waking in the night, still needing to be rocked back to sleep. From the outside, it was a family many people would have called lucky, a swing set in the backyard, a mother who had built her entire career around helping other families welcome children into the world. On social media, Lindsay posted about motherhood openly, the exhaustion, the identity loss, the humor she tried to find in it. Later, prosecutors would introduce one of those posts into evidence, a message in which Lindsay described Dawson, her 3-year-old son, as the most difficult human she had ever encountered. A joke, most parents would say. A mother venting the way millions of mothers vent online every day. But inside that house, according to what investigators and Lindsay's own family would later describe, something had been wearing this mother down for months, and almost none of it was visible from the street, not even 4 days before it all ended, when she sat alone with her phone and typed a question we'll come back to. By December 2022, according to her husband's later account, Lindsay was telling him she was having thoughts of harming herself and thoughts of harming the children. He would later tell investigators that his marriage, one he described as genuinely happy, had, without warning, become something he no longer recognized. On January 1st, 2023, New Year's Day, Lindsay checked herself into McLean Hospital, one of the top psychiatric institutions in the country, located just outside Boston. Her psychiatrist there, Dr. Alia Goodhart, would later testify that when Lindsay arrived, she was already worried about one of her prior medications, an antipsychotic she'd been prescribed to help her sleep, and about a side effect of that drug, feeling emotionally numb. Goodhart diagnosed her with insomnia, tied to an underlying mental health condition, and began tapering the medication down. Crucially, Goodhart would later testify that during that 5-day stay, Lindsay denied wanting to hurt herself and denied wanting to hurt anyone else. On January 5th, Lindsay Clancy was discharged. 19 days later, her children would be dead. And in those 19 days, her phone would become the closest thing anyone has to a window into what was actually happening in her mind, including that one search, 4 days out, that we opened this video with. If a story like this is landing with you, if you've never heard these details before, this is the kind of investigation we build every single week. Hit subscribe now, because you will not want to miss where this one goes. In the weeks after leaving McLean, Lindsay's husband told friends he was worried. Records later obtained by investigators show Patrick confided that Lindsay had been prescribed more medication after her hospital stay, and he suspected she was suffering withdrawal from a benzodiazepine, a class of anti-anxiety drug that can cause severe psychological effects when a person's body is weaned off it too quickly. Patrick told friends his wife had experienced the worst possible side effects from the combination of drugs she'd been given. Her own attorney would later put it even more bluntly in public comments, describing the medication cocktail as having turned Lindsay into a version of herself she no longer was. 2 days before the killings, on January 22nd, the Clancys went to dinner with friends. One of those friends would later tell investigators that Lindsay seemed fairly normal that night, mostly quiet, mostly on her phone, keeping to herself. The friend admitted being surprised Lindsay had even come, given what Patrick had already confided about her health, and said it was the first time they'd seen her in a couple of months. Sit with that for a moment. 2 days before her children died, Lindsay Clancy sat across a dinner table from people who loved her, and nobody at that table knew what was happening inside her. Not because nobody cared. Patrick reached out to friends. Lindsay reached out to doctors. She had a hospitalization on her record. She had a documented history of frightening thoughts serious enough that she had voiced them to her own husband weeks earlier. And still, 2 days before the unthinkable, and 2 days before that search we opened with, she looked to the people who loved her, like a tired mother having an ordinary dinner. Now we return to that search. On January 20th, 2023, at 9:14 in the evening, Lindsay Clancy's phone accessed the question, "Can you treat a sociopath?" Investigators would later testify that it wasn't an isolated search. In the weeks surrounding it, Lindsay's phone and her Microsoft Surface Pro were used to look up postpartum psychosis, bipolar disorder, the symptoms of psychosis and hallucinations, medications and their side effects. Months earlier, in August of 2022, her browsing history shows she had clicked through a series of links from a Wikipedia page about a musician who died by suicide, eventually landing on a page describing suicide methods. This is the piece of the case that has split prosecutors and defense attorneys almost completely down the middle. The prosecution's argument is direct. These were not the searches of a woman losing her grip on reality. They were, prosecutors allege, the searches of someone building a case in her own mind, someone gathering information, someone aware enough to ask specific, targeted questions about her own psychological state and how it might be perceived by others later. The defense tells a different story entirely. They argue these searches are not evidence of a calculating mind. They're a written record of a woman watching herself come apart in real time and trying, desperately, to name what was happening to her. A woman who, according to her legal team, would later describe hearing a man's voice in her head, telling her this was her last chance to act. 4 days after that search, on the morning of January 24th, the Clancy family did what looked, on the surface, like an entirely ordinary Tuesday. They took the kids to a pediatrician's appointment. Afterward, the children played outside in the snow. Just over 2 weeks earlier, the whole family had spent a day together at the Museum of Science in Boston. Home video shown to jurors captured them pausing at an exhibit, the kids pointing at something on display, nothing about the footage suggesting anything was wrong. There is nothing on that footage. No warning. No clue. Just a mother, a father, and 3 children, doing what families do. At around 5:15 p.m. on January 24th, Patrick Clancy was working from his home office in the basement when Lindsay texted him. She hadn't cooked anything. It had been a long day. Could he pick up takeout from a restaurant called 3V? He agreed. On his way, another text came through. Could he also stop at CVS for medicine for the kids? He called her while he searched the pharmacy shelves for what she'd asked for. She sounded quiet on the phone. He would later testify. Busy. He assumed she was in the middle of giving the children their baths. He hung up, thinking nothing of it. He was gone for roughly 20 minutes. At 6:09 p.m., Patrick Clancy walked back into a house that was completely silent. He called out for Lindsay. No answer. He went upstairs. Their bedroom door was locked. When he got it open, he saw blood on the floor and a window standing open to the cold January air. He ran outside. He found Lindsay on the ground below the window, injured, barely conscious. He called 911. On that call, 7 minutes long, later played for a jury who sat in near total silence, Patrick can be heard telling his wife to wake up while she moans, struggling to speak. He asks her where the children are. She answers, in the basement. Paramedics arrive to treat Lindsay. Patrick, still on the phone with the dispatcher, goes to look for his kids. His footsteps are heard moving through the house, and then comes the sound that would define this case for everyone who has ever had to sit through it. Patrick Clancy, screaming into the phone that his wife had killed the children. Cora, Dawson, Callan, all three found in the basement, each with an exercise resistance band around their neck. Dawson, 3 years old, had dressed himself for the very first time that morning, a small, ordinary act of independence, captured in a photo his father had taken hours before his son died in that basement, wearing the outfit he'd chosen. Duxbury Police Dispatch went out at 6:11 p.m., 2 minutes after Patrick's call. Officers arrived within minutes and found Lindsay Clancy breathing, semi-conscious, her injuries no longer actively bleeding. The fall from that second-story window, a fall her own defense team would later argue in a motion was consistent with someone going out headfirst, not simply climbing through, would leave her permanently paralyzed from the waist down. Before we get into what this trial has actually turned into, because it is not what most people expect, if you've made it this far, you already know this isn't the kind of case we rush through. Comment the one detail from this story that's staying with you tonight, and subscribe if you want to be here for every case we cover this deeply. Here's the question that will decide the rest of Lindsay Clancy's life, and it isn't the one you'd expect. It isn't, did she do it? Nobody in that courtroom disputes that. The question is whether the law considers her responsible for it. And that phrase, not guilty by reason of insanity, means something far narrower than most people assume. It does not mean she walks free. Under the standard Massachusetts uses, a defendant can only be found not criminally responsible if a mental disease or defect left her unable to appreciate that what she was doing was wrong, or unable to control her actions even while understanding that. If a jury finds that true here, Lindsay Clancy does not go home. She goes to a locked psychiatric facility, likely for years, possibly for life, reviewed periodically by the same court system that would otherwise have sentenced her to prison. So strip away everything else, and this trial comes down to one cold, narrow question. On the evening of January 24th, 2023, was Lindsay Clancy capable of understanding right from wrong? 12 strangers in Plymouth County are the only people who get to answer it. In the days that followed, Lindsay Clancy was formally charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, along with strangulation and assault and battery charges. She was arraigned remotely from her hospital bed, too injured to appear in a courtroom for the crime she was accused of committing inside her own home. The small South Shore community of Duxbury was left reeling. This wasn't a stranger. This was a nurse. A mother. Other parents recognized from the school pickup line, from the pediatrician's waiting room, from the community pool in summer. Lindsay Clancy's legal team wasted no time laying out their defense. This was not a calculated act of violence, they argued, but the outcome of a mental health system that had failed her repeatedly. They pointed to the misdiagnosis, to the medication cascade her husband had already flagged as dangerous weeks before the killings, to the 5 days at McLean that ended not with a solution, but with a discharge and a taper schedule. In the years since, both Lindsay and Patrick Clancy have taken that argument outside the criminal courtroom entirely, filing lawsuits against several of the medical providers who treated Lindsay in the months before her children died, alleging she was overmedicated and never properly diagnosed. Those providers have denied the allegations. In the days after the killings, this case didn't just stay in Massachusetts. It went national, then global, and then, inevitably, it went to social media, where amateur sleuths built entire alternate theories in comment sections and TikTok videos, some of them pointing fingers at Patrick Clancy himself, questioning why a father would leave a visibly struggling wife alone with 3 young children for even 20 minutes. Patrick has never been charged with any crime. Investigators found no evidence implicating him in his children's deaths, but the online theories persisted anyway, a reminder of how quickly a genuine tragedy can curdle into content for strangers who were never in that house and never will be. We ask this on every case like this one, and we mean it every time. If true crime stories like this deserve to be told with this much care and this much detail, the best way to support that is simple. Like this video. Drop a comment telling us what you think really happened inside that house, and make sure you're subscribed. It genuinely helps this channel keep going. More than 3 years after the deaths of Cora, Dawson, and Callan Clancy, their mother sat in Plymouth Superior Court in a wheelchair, facing the possibility of spending the rest of her life in prison. Lindsay Clancy's defense has never disputed that she was the one who killed her children. What her trial has been fighting over day after agonizing day is whether she should be held criminally responsible for it. Prosecutors have built their case around planning and intent. They point to the searches, to the fact that Lindsay was the one who sent Patrick out of the house that evening, first for dinner, then for medicine, buying herself roughly 20 minutes alone. They point to a Facebook post calling her own son difficult as evidence, they argue, of resentment beneath the surface. They argue that a woman in the grip of a total psychiatric break does not calmly text her husband about takeout, then act with the timed precision investigators say the evidence shows. The defense has methodically built the opposite picture. A woman who had begged for help for months, who had been hospitalized and discharged without an accurate diagnosis, who had been prescribed medication after medication that her own husband told friends was turning her into someone else. They argue Lindsay was suffering a complete break from reality that night, that she believed she heard a man's voice telling her this was her last chance, and that whatever happened in that basement was not the act of a rational, responsible mind. Jurors in this trial have sat through testimony that has visibly broken even seasoned courtroom professionals. Patrick Clancy described finding his children, his voice giving out partway through. Then came the 911 call itself, played once, in full, and it left Lindsay Clancy sobbing so hard into her hands in open court that at one point the witness on the stand couldn't be heard over her. Dr. Barbara Olson, a state medical examiner, walked the jury through 5-year-old Cora's autopsy, detailing injuries consistent with ligature strangulation. Dr. Renee Stonebridge took them through Dawson's, and then through the cause of death for 8-month-old Callan, complications of mechanical asphyxia. More than once, Judge William Sullivan called recess so Lindsay Clancy could be wheeled out of the courtroom, unable to stop crying long enough for testimony to continue. State police investigators walked the jury through search after search pulled from Lindsay's devices, some pointing toward awareness and planning, others pointing toward a mind unraveling in real time. The jury has even walked through the house on Summer Street itself, room by room, guided through the same basement where 3 children's lives ended. The jury has also heard from people who knew Lindsay long before any of this began, a childhood friend, Lindsay's former father-in-law, even the family's nanny. Each asked, in different ways, the same underlying question: did you see this coming? None of them, according to their testimony, did, and Kevin Reddington, Lindsay's defense attorney, has continued pushing to expand the defense's expert witness list throughout the trial, including a request to bring in specialists who could testify that Lindsay's own injuries, consistent, they argue, with someone going out that window head first rather than carefully climbing out, reflect the mindset of someone who wanted to die, not someone thinking clearly about consequences. As of this week, testimony is still ongoing. No verdict has been reached. Depending on which 12 people believe, Lindsay Clancy either committed one of the most calculated acts of violence in recent Massachusetts history, or she was a mother so profoundly failed by the people and the system meant to help her that she was no longer capable of understanding what she was doing. Both of those things cannot be true. only a jury gets to decide which one is. Whatever this jury decides, this case has forced an entire country to confront a condition most people have never heard of, and one that new mothers are rarely warned about in any real detail: postpartum psychosis. It is not the same as postpartum depression, and doctors are quick to stress that distinction. Postpartum depression, which affects a significant share of new mothers, involves persistent sadness, exhaustion, and anxiety. Postpartum psychosis is far rarer, affecting roughly 1 to 2 out of every 1,000 births, and far more severe. It can include hallucinations, delusions, paranoia, and a complete break from reality, often appearing suddenly, within days or weeks of childbirth. Medical experts describe it as a genuine psychiatric emergency, one that can escalate with terrifying speed, and one where the person experiencing it frequently does not recognize that anything is wrong. That's the medical backdrop this entire trial sits on top of. Lindsay Clancy was never diagnosed with postpartum psychosis by the doctors who treated her before January 24th. She was diagnosed with anxiety. Her defense argues that failure to diagnose, not any deliberate cruelty, is the real root of this tragedy. Prosecutors argue that regardless of what she was or wasn't diagnosed with, her actions in the days and hours before the killings show a level of planning inconsistent with a genuine psychotic break. It's worth saying plainly, cases like this are used by advocates and doctors alike to push for something concrete: better postpartum screening, faster access to psychiatric care, and a healthcare system that takes a mother saying, "I'm having thoughts of hurting my baby," as seriously as it would take any other medical emergency. Whatever the jury ultimately decides about Lindsay Clancy's criminal responsibility, 3 children are still gone, and the system that was supposed to catch a mother in crisis did not catch her in time. There is no clean ending to this story yet, because the story itself isn't over. A jury in Plymouth County is still weighing the evidence right now, still trying to answer the question that has divided an entire community, an entire legal team. And honestly, most people who have followed this case, was this an act of violence, or the final collapse of a mind that had been breaking for months in plain sight? What we do know is this: 4 days before her children died, a woman who had spent her career caring for other people's newborns sat alone in her own home and asked her phone a question about herself. A question a jury is likely replaying right now, the same way we have throughout this video, trying to decide if it was the last coherent thought of a woman losing herself, or the first sign of a plan already taking shape. Whatever the answer turns out to be in a court of law, it will never bring back Cora, Dawson, or Callan Clancy. It will never undo the 20 minutes their father spent picking up dinner, unaware it would be the last ordinary errand of his old life. We'll be following this trial closely, and we'll bring you the verdict the moment it comes down. If this investigation moved you, this is exactly the kind of case we specialize in. The ones with no easy villain, no easy answer, and a real family left to live with what happened long after the cameras leave the courtroom. This has been Mysterious Crime Chronicles, the true story behind the headlines. Subscribe so you're here when we bring you the verdict.